can't believe we're only 3 episodes away from the end of the series. This is going to be a long video, I think. Right, so we're talking tonight about the Interstellar Song Contest, the brand new episode of Doctor Who. Did it live up to the hype? Is it something that's going to bring us outstanding harmony or sow discord amongst the fans? As always, this video is going to contain spoilers, so you have been warned. And if you're not careful, it might also contain singing. So beware all ye who enter here as we go beyond the sofa. Well, it's been another week, and mostly speculation has been rife about the end of the show. Firstly, the fact that we only have 3 episodes left of what we're currently watching, and secondly, the idea that it hasn't been renewed yet. Well, we had some news about that yesterday when one of the red top newspapers in the UK reported that Doctor Who was going to return for another season. Now, whilst this isn't official confirmation from the BBC, it is something that does sound kind of positive, and it'd be great if this was accurate and true. And again, I think we have to take this with a pinch of salt, because red top newspapers are not always the most honest. And when, you don't quite know what their sources are. So whilst, I treat this news with a lot of hope, there is a little bit of me which is still going, have they got it quite right? We don't know. I hope they have, because I'd like to see another season of Doctor Who. Although it sounds like that won't be here until 2027 regardless. So, ratings. We do this every week. Last week, the overnights were up slightly by nearly 100,000. The week before, the consolidated made 2.8 million. These aren't good figures. I'm going to be brutally honest here. I'm still seeing certain shows which are getting towards the 5 million mark, and I still think, as what is a flagship television series, Doctor Who should be up there. The fact that this isn't is a bit of a worry, but again, I've said this before, that isn't a sign that this is going to be cancelled. It's not even a sign that Disney are going to pull out. We still don't know that. What it is a sign that I think the show should be doing better, and that actually it's still not appealing to the core BBC audience, even if it's appealing to a lot of the fans of the show who are still watching. And we know the fans are watching because we're getting consistently the same sort of figures watching on iPlayer. So that iPlayer contingent is still pretty strong. It's the same thing week on week. Now, someone said in the comments last week, the iPlayer figures don't even double the normal viewing figures. Well, iPlayer figures never double the normal viewing figures. It just doesn't happen. It is still the case that the majority of people watching the BBC are watching it terrestrially. And those people who are watching on catch-up are the minority, or watching fresh on the BBC. They are a minority. So we have to take that into consideration. And when you do that, you find that those iPlayer figures are pretty consistent. And they're not bad in terms of iPlayer. They stand up against what a lot of other stuff is getting on the BBC and what we know from ITV and stuff. What we can say is that the current ratings as they stand are consistent with the other ratings from this series. So it's not really losing a lot in terms of viewership over time. It's kind of hovering around the 1.6 mark for the uptick from iPlayer. We got a bit of a boost for one episode, which is always going to happen. We got a bit of a boost in week 3. No idea why. I think we might get a boost this week as well, because it's kind of linked to the Eurovision Song Contest, and then it's going to lead into Eurovision. So hopefully, if it's advertised well, people might sit down and they might go, Doctor Who's on. They're doing a Eurovision special. We'll see. But that's enough housekeeping. Let's talk about the actual episode. And this week, the Doctor and Belinda find themselves transported to the Intergeriatric Snog Contest. Sorry, I think there's a bit of snot on the auto cue. With a special appearance from Graham Norton from the actual song contest and Rylan from that thing he does, the Intergalactic Song Contest should be one of those episodes that does something that Doctor Who does very well, and that's the big camp, showy sort of show. You know, I've never been too impressed with Doctor Who when it tries to do modern culture. We had it with the Big Brother, Trini and Susanna, The Weakest Link, way back in Series 1, and I didn't think that it worked back then. My overriding feeling is that in 10 years' time, these shows are either going to be off the air or they're not going to be as well received or well watched. And it's going to feel really dated, which is something that a lot of Doctor Who misses purely by dint of the fact that it's either set historically or set in outer space, and you can kind of allow your disbelief to be suspended because of it. It's a lot harder to do that when you say everybody in 1,000 years' time remembers what Big Brother is, when we don't really remember what Big Brother is nowadays, even though it's still on television, isn't it? I think it's still on television. The Eurovision Song Contest is something a bit different, though, and in our lifetimes, it probably isn't something that's going to slow down. The chances of it not being broadcast one year, unless there's really, something seriously wrong in Europe, if there's a massive war or something like that. Eurovision was set up specifically to bring countries together. And whether or not you like it, whether you're appalled by its foibles, it doesn't really matter. That's what it is there for, and it will likely continue ad infinitum. It's been around now since 1956, so before the very first episode of Doctor Who even aired, and it's one of the longest running programmes on the BBC. And so it kind of feels right that one of the longest running programmes on the BBC gets to do a takeoff of another one of the longest running programmes on the BBC. And it also leads us into something that we haven't had in a while. Eurovision is a one-night thing. It's something that you really have to watch live. You can catch up with it, sure, but the interest, the excitement about Eurovision is watching it whilst it happens, very much like a football match, which is on beforehand. So people will tune in to the Eurovision Song Contest in numbers far greater than they would ever tune in to Doctor Who. But Doctor Who is going to be on right before it, and I'm hoping that what might happen here is that people will catch that and will see that there's a connection between the two, and they'll start a little bit earlier and go, I tell you what, we'll just watch Doctor Who and make a night of it. Make it a big Eurovision-themed night. And I think actually in terms of production, that's a very smart thing to do. Much like having a Christmas special where everything's a bit Christmassy and then you tell a story and, it's there for Christmas. Having something connected with a major television event, and Eurovision is a major television event, could actually do the show some good. But what about the actual content? Well, it's written by Juno Dawson, and there's been some talk over the week about whether or not politics, and particularly a particular angle of politics, is going to make it into the show. So I want to be absolutely clear about what I'm going to cover in this video and what I'm not really covering in this video. I don't care what Juno Dawson's politics is outside of writing this episode of Doctor Who. I don't really care about the political leanings of a particular person. What I care about is whether or not they produce a good show. Is it well structured? And if you're going to use politics in it, and I've said this in videos before, that the politics is there as an integral part of the story, and it doesn't unbalance the plot or the pacing or any of the other themes. And I'm saying all of this because I think it's important to make it clear. In the comments last week, somebody said that the writer of last week's episode, I can't quite remember what he said. He said it was a Marxist or a communist or something like that. And I don't know. And I don't care. That doesn't change his ability to write. And if I think I wrote it well, I'm going to say so. And if I don't, I'm going to say that. And I'm trying to do this as objectively as possible. Now, obviously, we're going to get into the bit at the end a little bit later on. But let's take the actual episode on its own. And to be honest, I found it a little bit underwhelming. I thought that this particular episode of Doctor Who could have been something that would help spark people's imagination. And I'm not quite sure it's going to do that. Having said that, by and large, I did actually quite like the episode. I suppose I'm a little bit schizophrenic, I guess. I don't know. ironically for Doctor Who, and for some of the subject matter that's covered in the episode, it wasn't actually quite camp enough. I think that was part of the problem. I thought it had a really good use of Graham Norton, who said several times in the past that he's not a natural actor, that he'd felt uncomfortable when he did his scenes in Father Ted, for example. So I wasn't expecting him to be a main character, but I do think that the way that they used him was actually really good. And the same with Rylan as well.
Hey?
Wait, what happened?
Oh, you came back from the dead.
Sums up my career.
Again, he's not an actor, he's a presenter. And what they managed to do was they managed to bring out all of his presenting abilities without having to rely on tons of lines of dialogue. It was a bit of a shame that we didn't see much of the other presenter, who must have spent hours in makeup to be turned into a kind of humanoid cat thing, only to have very little screen time at all. I guess there's a reason for that. The episode is already struggling with its running time, so we couldn't really have done much more with the whole song contest thing. But I would have liked to have seen a song contest going on, and some of the actions behind the scenes being juxtaposed with the front of house having to keep this big song contest thing going. And, if you saw that and then chaos was going on in the control booth, that would have been fun. So let's talk about the structure here, because I did think that some of the plot elements were a little bit contrived. For example, I don't really buy into the Doctor having a physiological thing happen to him. His body is freezing. And then suddenly, by what seems to be sheer will alone, he wakes up and he shakes up off all of this ice. And I know, okay, he's the Doctor, but that's not an excuse for a cheap get-out-of-jail solution to what would otherwise be a major problem. I've thought of this in instances like this before. It doesn't quite work. It doesn't always feel earned, I suppose. It's a plot contrivance. The Doctor waking up the way that he did is a plot contrivance. It's not something that either we know that the Doctor is capable of doing or something that we expected to happen. He needed to have that happen because that's the way the plot needed to play out and nothing else. It's that sort of writing which is very surface level. It's not just here that we see it. We see it with the Doctor knowing that he has to do something in that split second to save all of those audience members. We see it with the couple who at the beginning of the episode can't get through the door because it's locked, and yet one of them turns out to be almost a technical genius who's been working on the song contest and all the technicalities of it, and who helps the Doctor do something that usually the Doctor would do on his own and work out on his own. So I don't quite buy into a lot of the stuff that happens. And it's a shame, really, because there is a very good, solid core at the heart of this episode that really works. What I'm finding, though, is that a lot of the conjoining material, it's the tendons of the story that don't seem to be quite connected. And those are the things that I think that are pulling me out of the story this week. And I've got to say, though, that there's been other instances of the show doing stuff like this, and in this particular episode, well, it handles it a lot better. It's just that there's so many of them this week. It doesn't always feel like we're watching something coherent. But from that, we get onto the villain and onto their motivations. And actually, this is something that I think the episode does really well. We saw a few weeks ago with Connor, and then a few weeks before that in Robot Revolution, how you can have this character that seemingly has motivation, but the motivation is really thin because actually you're basing all of that on what would be basically a set of stereotypes rather than real human motivation. And let's face it, that's often lazy and it's inaccurate. And here we've got something which is completely different. We've got a villain who actually, their motivation is incredibly strong. Their whole planet was wiped out. The irony is that the Doctor themselves could have been in the very same position as Kid, because essentially the same thing happened to him. What we're actually seeing here with Kid is a character who isn't a million miles away from Christopher Eccleston's Doctor in Dalek, where he's essentially making a lot of the same moves. The only difference here is that Christopher Eccleston's Doctor wouldn't have been killing 3 trillion people, but he would have been committing genocide, let's be clear about that. And that's the other thing that just brought me out of the episode a little bit. 3 trillion people... across an Interstellar thing, it doesn't sound like enough. But I'll forgive that. I mean, what Kid is doing here is essentially having that same reaction that the Doctor had after the Time War. And it's understandable. It's horrific, the fact that you're going to kill that many people who probably have absolutely nothing to do with the destruction of your world, but it's understandable. It's human. And that might feel like an odd thing to say when you're basically talking about a story full of aliens and that we know that aliens can be completely different from humans. But if you look at it in terms of writing and in terms of creating a story, you still need all of your characters to be human in some respect, because you need people to be able to connect with them. And whilst I don't think anybody would look at Kid and go, that's absolutely a template for how I want to live my life, it's not a million miles away from our own experiences that we couldn't see ourselves falling into the same trap that he falls into. And then we have what I was almost screaming out for the other week during Lucky Day, where the Doctor actually acts like the oncoming storm that we all know is part of his character at some level.
Because I have met so many versions of you, Kid, and revenge is just an excuse.
He becomes that thing which he would probably despise if he saw it in somebody else. We all know that it's there. We all know that there's a possibility he's going to turn into that person. And actually, what I did like is that we had this sort of flash of Susan in the TARDIS at the beginning. And that's almost, it's your setup. That's your moment where you go, this is something that's important. And then later on, when he's performing this act of brutality, it's partly another flash of Susan in the TARDIS that spurs him to stop. Of course, finally, it's seeing that Belinda is alive and okay. But it does show that there is this central core of the Doctor that is still motivated by the most basic instincts of all of us. An instinct to protect family, the instinct to care, not just about people, but about how people perceive us, and that to want to be better because of that. And along with that, we have a story of persecution, how the Hellions have been mistreated by other races in the galaxy, how people haven't cared, how that race has not been allowed to compete in the song contest, because the perception of them is that the Hellions did all of this themselves. Whereas the reality is the corporation was the thing that instigated all of the problems on their planet. Now look, I wasn't keen on having a faceless corporation. I suppose the real bad guy is that corporation, isn't it? Not the antagonist of the episode, but the motivating factor that causes all of the problems is the corporation. And that feels, I suppose, a little bit too on the nose. I think you're calling it the corporation. I think it's not an unfair way of giving motivation here. And one of the things I think is missing in current Doctor Who, and this is why I don't like the idea of having big corporations and it's just the corporation and that's it. One of the things I think is missing is the end of an episode where I think everything is going to be all right again and the big bad evil thing has been vanquished. And it almost felt a little bit like Kablam, that we get to the end of the episode and sure, there's been this sort of shift, but the company is going to move on and it's still going to do all of the things that it was always doing. There's no real turn towards the company from people who are going, hang on a minute, you shouldn't have been doing that. And I think that's one of the things that the past Doctor Who has done very well, and I think it's a shame that we don't get that kind of bigger pushback. It's so much more interesting to think about if you've got maybe a whole audience there who all owe their lives in some way, shape or form to the company, and you're asking them to act against their best interest in order to recognise what has happened on Helios. And that could be really interesting. Obviously, not something you can probably cover in a 45-minute episode of Doctor Who, but there's more there that I think that we miss out on. So overall, the episode is a bit of a mixed bag. A few things that, you might consider plot contrivances, but at the same time, it's got a really good solid core that I think is going to resonate with people. There has been some talk already about this episode being connected with Gaza and Israel and all of that, and I'm not sure that's necessarily the intention of the author. And I definitely don't think that it is something that comes across in the text, the themes, or the subtext. I think that is something that you could easily read into it if you wanted to, if you're sat there looking for it, sure. But I'm not entirely sure that that's a valid critique overall. I think in years to come, I'm not sure that's what people are going to take away from it. But tying it back to Eurovision, I really love the use of Bucks Fizz in this. When they were re-energizing isn't the right word, when they were thawing everybody out. But it was a lovely moment because I remember Bucks Fizz when I was a kid. I remember their entry into the song contest and it was everywhere for a good few months, I think. And that song was played all over the place. It was a real cornerstone of that time in my childhood. And so to hear it again, that was really nice. Now, there are other issues. I mean, I'm tired of the Last of the Time Lords thing, which we had 4 or 5 seasons where that was a big thing, and it just feels like it's all very one note. It feels like we're not progressing at all. And I didn't understand how Belinda knew about the Mavity thing, because she wasn't there, as far as I remember, where the Doctor was talking about it. And it's such a throwaway line. You know, you have to have Belinda doing something. It's important that a character is there for a reason and not just to sort of sit beside the Doctor and say, "Oh, aren't you great?" But, you know, it should have been established that she knew what she was talking about beforehand. But whilst I noticed them, none of those things were massive problems. They weren't things that I'd have liked to have seen them changed, okay? But they're not the end of the world when it comes to the story. And by and large, I think this episode was actually pretty solid. And there's a possibility that if you're watching Eurovision, you might watch this beforehand and go, "Oh, that was fun." We'll see. I'm not actually holding my breath for it, but we'll see. There's a glimmer of hope there. And I suppose now we really need to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to this episode. Firstly, the flashbacks. And flashbacks is probably not the right word because the flashes of Susan in the TARDIS, the modern TARDIS. So, you know, the real Susan, Carol Ann Ford, back for a cameo appearance, and a very short one, almost throwaway, but very important part to the story. And that's interesting. And I think, okay, what's going to happen with this? She's instructed the Doctor to find her. So that's something that could be really interesting. I'd like to see how that plays out in the future if it does. I like little bits of story like that. They're usually quite fun. It's going to cause a lot of speculation, possibly not as much speculation as the next reveal, but I think it's going to cause a lot of chat, and that's a good thing with the fandom. And maybe this means that we're going to get a little bit more Susan in the last 2 episodes. I don't know. We'll find out. That's something that's going to be fun to think about, and it's going to be fun to find out. And that's one of those little things that Doctor Who does well. And I really enjoy it when there's that sort of speculation. Now, look, I'm not a big fan of spoilers. I don't like them. And in some instances, speculation has spoiled things for me because, well, we'll get into that in a second. But in instances like this, where there's a little flash of something and then you don't know anything else about it, I think that's the sort of thing that can spark imagination. And I do genuinely love those bits. What I don't love, though, is when people go, and this is all how it ties together because I know a spoiler from the rest of the series. That's not fun. Let people watch the series as intended because that's more interesting for them. But then we get to the Rani, and to me, this was a bit of a disappointing reveal. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm actually really glad the Rani is back. It's a character that I would have liked to have seen back 20-odd years ago when the thing started, you know, when the Master came back. There was no reason for not bringing the Rani back at that point. And I'm glad we've got to that point now. I'm glad she's back as a character. I think that's fantastic. But the fact that the production team, and I suppose really I'm saying Russell T Davies here, thinks that it feels like he's saying, "Oh, I'm so much smarter than the fans because I'm going to hide these clues and they're never going to find them." And the fans then just work it out. And that seems a little bit arrogant because just those puns that he was using to hide people's names in season 1, well, you can do that once, but you can't really get away with it for a second time because people have worked out how it works. And let's face it, fans have worked out pretty early on in this series who Mrs. Flood was. In fact, last series who Mrs. Flood was. And it just becomes untenable. You know, people were bound to make the leap, "Oh, this has to be the Rani." And they did very, very quickly. So this is something that's been bandied around in fan circles for the past year and a bit. And unfortunately, it means that it didn't have the impact that it deserved. I also Don't like the whole idea of bi-generation now seemingly being the staple thing that we're seeing a Time Lord do. That shouldn't be the case, because it was meant to be this epoch event, and now everyone's doing it. And I would have much preferred the reveal to be something like Iris Wildtime, who nobody really knows. A lot of Doctor Who fans know who she is, but outside that, nobody really knows. So there's a lot more you could explore with that character. But it's something that, the fan base aren't going to necessarily guess as well. And if you're going to do the sort of bait and switch thing, if you're going to do that big reveal of somebody who you probably know from something else, it shouldn't be this easy to work out who it is. And I think that spoils something that could be a really good reveal. I don't know, because I'm trying to make these videos as quickly as possible. So I haven't figured out who the Rani is. I didn't read the name of the actor. I know it came up in the credits and it was there and gone, and then I was thinking about writing this video. But she seemed fine going into it. She seemed really good going into it. Looking forward to seeing more of that. And obviously, we've still got Mrs. Flood as a character who'll be some sort of henchman by the look of it. So actually, I'm on board with the story and I'm looking forward to that and the finale and everything. But I'm just disappointed that it's been done in a way that makes it so easy for fans to work out who this is going to be. For the past year or so, I've been going, I hope this isn't the Rani, really because I wanted to be surprised and I wasn't. And whilst I'm thrilled the character's back, I just feel a little bit let down again, which is unfortunately how I felt as we left the end of last season. So I'm a bit trepidatious going into this next episode of Doctor Who. I hope it's going to be good, and it could go either way, as they have done in the past. But I hope it's going to be good. And I'm looking forward to it. The other thing I'm looking forward to is the last week where I don't have to get up early in the morning anymore, because the finale in 2 weeks' time is going to be at the same time as broadcast. iPlayer and broadcast going out at the same time. So that means I get to sit and watch this in the evening with everybody else. And that's going to feel a bit more of an experience, I think. And I'm excited about that. So I have everything crossed. My fingers, my toes, my kidneys. And the next few weeks are going to be interesting. That's what I think anyway. I'm hoping they're going to be great. Yeah, that's what I think. And I'd love to know what you think in the comments below. Like I said last week, I do read them all. I can't always respond to all of them because time, and I don't have a TARDIS to go back and do it all. But I do appreciate every single time that somebody posts and every time somebody does leave a message. And I look forward to seeing what you thought about this particular episode as well. No doubt there's going to be a lot of people in the comments who don't like it, because that just seems to be the kind of baseline with every episode in this season. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. It's been lovely being here for the last few weeks, and I'm kind of looking forward to it all being over, but at the same time thinking, I don't have that massive motivation to make another Doctor Who video this week. So, what am I going to do? Well, we'll find out, and we'll find out next week what the finale, at least part one of the finale, has in store, and we'll find out what I'm going to do in a few weeks' time, whether or not I'm going to have another video ready. But until then, thanks ever so much for coming along, and I hope that you will join me next week for the first part of our 2-part finale. I think that's what it is anyway. I'm rambling a bit now, but please do join me next week as we go beyond the sofa.